With the work session for May 8th, 2018, we have one item on the agenda, which is the presentation of the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
So this is led by Town Manager. Well, first of all, let me just say this. I want to extend my thanks to the staff for what has been a lengthy budget process. I know these are never easy. It starts out in January and it culminates with Greg getting all the credit and getting a chance to present the budget to us. He gets all the questions and all that, but it's a team effort, and we thank you, and please pass on our thanks to the rest of the staff for a job well done to get us here. With that, I'll turn it over to our town manager and our finance director for presentation of the budget. I'm guessing that what you want to do is go through your slides and then ask for clarification questions at the end and explain how we get detailed questions in front of you over the next couple of weeks. So take it away.
That's right. So tonight you have in front of you a couple documents that I'm going to reference real quick and then kind of transition into the presentation. One is the copy of the PowerPoint that we'll talk off of tonight for the budget presentation. The second is a hard copy of the actual budget transmittal letter with a lot of details through a number of pages that give some specifics of things that are in the budget. That document also has the actual budget ordinance that's attached. It starts on page 20, and then it has detail by department and division and function there. And then the last thing that's attached to that particular document is the fee schedule for FY 19 or 18-19, the proposed fee schedule. So those are the major components that are part of the document. That document is right at 50 pages, so that's the bound document. First of all, before we start the recommended budget presentation, I just want to thank the Board of Commissioners for the time that you took over the last number of months in providing feedback either in work sessions or at the board retreat that helps us in the development of the recommended budget. As you recall, in January we spent 2 days talking through a number of items that we have before us over the next 12 months and really over the next couple of years. The discussions that you engaged in with staff and with some folks from the outside included ways to fund long-term capital needs for the town from an infrastructure standpoint, whether those are parks, roads, facilities, looking in totality at what the town will need over the next 5 to 7 years, and then looking at ways to finance those. Certainly some things can be paid for on a pay-as-you-go basis, but the need was identified pretty early on, actually, 12 months ago or so, to come up with a CIP that could be adopted and that could be implemented and then could be amended over time. And that's the process that we started on about 12 months ago. We worked through with the board some of those options. We had Davenport and Company come and join us and a couple times over the course of the last 12 months, but then specifically in February to lay out kind of the latest iteration of kind of how those projects could lay out. We're going to talk about that a couple times tonight when we reflect back on some of that work that's been done and how it fits together with what we're suggesting as a recommended budget. So with that, thank you to the staff members. Every department participated this year in the crafting of the recommended budget. They sat and met with myself and Lisa and other members to talk through what was being requested, and then they met in some cases several other times to talk about ways that we could make adjustments, timing on particular items that we're discussing, details about capital projects. All that goes into that process that took place January, February, March into April, and then we really started focusing on the proposal that's before you tonight. So with that, we'll go ahead and start the presentation. The 2 days that you spent in January really related to some things that you wanted to get accomplished in the next couple years. And so we went through some exercises really to identify some of those things, and we've laid out 4 that are on the slide in front of you. Improved traffic congestion, completion of sidewalks, completion of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan update, and then the Waxhaw Marvin Park property. Those are our top priorities. They were ranked in an exercise that we did. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4 assigned here. These are just 4 things that were identified by the board in that 2-day time period, and they correlate with priorities that the town residents responded to in a survey that took place early in 2017 regarding traffic, and then also parks and recreation facilities. So these are consistent. There's nothing here that's really a surprise, and it was reflected in your discussion back in January. We're going to go through these just to talk about those, but Lisa's going to kind of focus on this slide, which has a lot of numbers on it, but explain what this is.
So this year, in this budget that you have here, this budget is more of an operating budget. It does have some other funds in it, but the general fund now for fiscal year 19 is an operating budget. There are no projects, there are no grants, there are just personnel, operating costs, and capital equipment that's used by the departments. So that is very different than the general fund budget was when it was adopted for fiscal year 18. And fiscal year 18, when you're looking at this column here, that's the amended budget. So we've amended the budget when this budget was passed, when you got this document. We've amended it several times. The first amendment happens July 1, and that's where all the encumbrances that were open as of fiscal year 17 rolled into fiscal year 18. So that added $350,000 to last year's budget immediately. I'm going to propose that we not do that again this year because the department heads went through a very thorough process of identifying the needs that will be for next year, so we don't need to re-encumber any open POs. So that's one thing that's changed. The other thing that we've amended over the last few months, if you remember, we extracted the POW bill from the general fund, and we extracted the police restricted funds from the general fund. We also moved the TAP grant out. Even though the board had approved that several years ago, the money remained in the general fund. And so what happened was, when we were trying to figure out how much we had available, it was kind of all muddled in there. It was very difficult to figure out how much fund balance we had available, how much fund balance was for the TAP grant, for example. So you all did budget amendments to move that out. So that's why in some cases, and especially if you go back to try and look at the original budget, it's going to be a little difficult unless you have some explanation. And in the manager's message, there's a lot of explanation of why those differences are, and I can provide you any other information that you need. So to go back up to the general fund, from the amended budget, this year's budget has $292,000 decrease, and that would be for both revenues and expenditures. The revenues actually increased in the fiscal year 19 budget, and you'll see a couple of those new revenues that we are proposing. But the reason why it looks like a decrease is that last year, and every year for the last several years, we've balanced the budget by using fund balance. So last year, if you look at the original, it was $300,000. It falls into other financing sources, so it's a little bit difficult when you're just reading this to know what that was. But that was fund balance. That's how the budget was balanced. We're not proposing balancing the budget with fund balance, and we're going to talk more about that as we go through this presentation. The Capital Projects Fund is one of those others that kind of had a whole lot of stuff in it. Every project the town ever did got put in there. What's left in there, we also extracted several projects out of there. We extracted Nesbitt, we extracted Town Creek, we extracted some of those projects and set those up in capital project ordinances. So those projects don't need to come back before you because you all adopted a capital project budget ordinance for those projects for the life of the project. So those projects are all set aside. So what's left in the capital projects fund is primarily $1.2 million for Kensington Drive. Additionally, there is some fund balance in there that was given to us by a developer, and we are going to use $105,000 of that for traffic signal, something like that. So that's the developer money, so we're not spending our own money for that. So whenever Kensington gets to a point where we're ready to do construction, we'll extract that and make it its own capital project ordinance also, and that fund hopefully will get closed so that the projects can clearly have whatever fund balance belongs to them very clearly identified. So hopefully all this will help the reader of our financial statements and our budgets better understand where all the money's coming from and where the money's going. The rental property fund has been there for several years. It is for the Nevins Price building and the parking lot. It is a self-sufficient fund. We collect revenues. We have a property manager that we pay the electric, and it has a little bit of a fund balance. It more than pays for itself, and part of that fund balance will be spent this fiscal year trying to determine the best use for that building. The technology fund is a restricted fund. It was established several years ago to pay for the software primarily of the building inspection and permit. 10% of all building inspection permits and planning permits go into that technology fund, and it's used exclusively for technology for those departments. PAL Bill Fund, I think most of you all know what PAL Bill Fund is. It's a state allocation for roads that is given out to municipalities. Here is another point I want to make about trying to compare last year to this year that is unfortunately this year a little bit difficult. Hopefully in the future it will be more clear. But if you look at that chart there, it looks like we have appropriated $927,000 in the current year and only $563,000 in the proposed. Well, that's because when you move the funds out, you had to appropriate an expenditure and you had to appropriate the revenue going in. So that was the fund balance and the current year's appropriation. We get $323,000 from the state every year. We've accumulated a great deal of that. We're going to use some of that accumulation in the proposed budget. In the current year budget, we're about to do paving of $341,000, and additionally we have a little bit of road repair and construction in the current year. So we'll do $500,000 worth of paving in fiscal year 19, plus additional $50,000 for road repair. The Police Explorer Fund was another one of those funds that you all broke out. The Police Explorers have their own fundraisers. They have a talent show, and they collect dues from each of the kids. And then they turn around and use that for activities. Well, what was happening in the prior years was they could collect their money. They might collect $2,000 and then only spend $1,000 of it, and then the year ends, and then it's gone. It goes into fund balance. So this helps the kids be able to keep the funds that they raise. So the state drug fund and the federal drug fund, Chief can tell you a little bit more about why they get that money. It's a certain amount of the cases that they work on, but those two funds are restricted. There's very strict rules about what they can be used for, and the police department handles those expenditures. So they're just here so that we can appropriate part of it. There is more fund balance in the state drug fund. The police drug fund hasn't been used in a number of years, but it is there in case they need it. The cemetery fund is a new fund that we're establishing for fiscal year 19. Cemetery usually makes a little bit of a profit, sometimes $2,000 up to $5,000 a year, and they make that money from selling the plots and opening and closing the grave sites. So they usually make about $17,000 a year, and they usually spend about $15,000 a year unless they need a piece of equipment. So that small profit, we're proposing that stay in that fund because eventually we're going to run out of cemetery plots. And the town has to care for that cemetery in perpetuity. So it's going to be a small amount that we're saving, but it's going to get us somewhere, and it seems logical to save that money. The transportation project fund, we're going to talk a little bit more about. Basically, that's the proposed $25 fee per vehicle, and we'll go into more detail about that. And the capital improvement plan is, again, $650,000, which you've seen in the prior budgets, but in the prior budget, we actually spent it. We spent this year $300,000 on Nesbit, and $350,000 was our final installment on the YMCA contribution to that project. What we're going to propose here is that we save that, and that's in line with the Davenport plan for our CIP.
So going back to the 4 priorities that are listed, we'll talk about these and really how this budget reflects and has something to do with each of these. The first really there is improved traffic congestion, and Lisa just shared with you 2 areas which are on the bottom of the slide, which is the STP and the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund. Those directly relate to bullet number 1 and 2, and then also to 3 and 4 to some extent. But really the traffic congestion, we have projects that are both long-term in nature and short-term in nature that are being considered. The long-term projects are those projects that are in the CIP that we've talked about. Those are projects where we might partner with NCDOT. We may partner with the developer. They're 5 to 7 years in length. They involve a process that sometimes is directed at the federal level, administered at the state level, and is unwieldy at best sometimes, but it's a process, and it comes, those are the strings that are attached to the money. In some cases, we're required to put up matches. In some cases, we're not. We just want to partner with NCDOT to maximize the project value. Those are 5 to 7 year projects. Those are CIP type projects. The projects that we've talked about most recently are more the STP projects that are Small Transportation Project Fund, so STP. Those are the tactical, smaller intersections, sidewalks, turn lane, traffic signal type projects that can be completed in a 12 to 18 month period. Those are the type projects that are funded by the town, could be funded by the town and a developer, could be funded by the town and the DOT, but most likely is going to be a town-led project. Most likely will be those that can be in the range of $150,000 to $300,000, and will be the type projects where there's really immediate congestion relief. So think about if you have a traffic signal that does not have a turn lane, provide a turn lane, that's immediate congestion relief. If there's a standardized signal and you then install a left-hand turn and a new signal head that provides for a left-hand turn, congestion relief because you have the ability to have a through movement. New sidewalks in a sidewalk program where we've previously really focused on small maintenance, small repair, small gap filling. I call it very modest approach to sidewalks. This would then give you an option to do a larger portion of sidewalks. We've talked about a couple of those options on the east side of town and also on the west side of town as being some options for the future. So STP and the CIP would really address improving traffic congestion. We'll go into a little bit more detail, but you've seen the CIP. We've talked about some of the options for the STP. Going back to the small transportation, that's something that if the board adopts the budget with the STP in place, then we anticipate that we'd sit back down with the board in a work session type environment and determine, based on your lead, which projects are on that list. And those would be the projects that staff would work on because we have funding to work on those. If we don't have funding, then we'll put that list aside because there really won't be a funded project at that point, and there won't be a way to accomplish them. The CIP would continue on because those are multi-year projects in nature, and there's a different way to fund those. Sidewalks, as we talked about that kind of relates to the STP. If you'll recall, the CIP had some provision for future out years for sidewalks as well, downtown streetscape, downtown projects. So 2 ways to address bullets number 1 and 2. Bullet number 3, the board's already taken a very pretty powerful step to fund that and get that moving forward, and you decided that you didn't want to just do a quick update that was, check the box. You wanted to do really something that was meaningful and really do a thorough job of updating the master plan, make it as valuable as possible, since we're going to go through the engagement process with the public, the gathering of data, which has already started, looking at what facilities are out there, looking at areas there might be gaps, and then looking for what needs to be provided, what type of amenities need to be provided. So that's ongoing. That's slated to be wrapped up by the end of the calendar year, and so that one's underway. Waxhaw Marvin Park, the master plan update will help inform what could happen and should happen on that piece of property. The second thing that would address bullet number 4 really is STP has an option to have the ability to do some sort of turn lane improvements there if that is called for in that location. So that's also part of how that could be addressed as a 4th item there on the list. The property tax rate is proposed as unchanged. Current rate's 36 cents per $100 of value. That is not proposed to change. We do see some conservative growth in the property tax base. That has the ability to be updated by the county as the year progresses. And we'll see some change in that as they update their estimate. But we have an estimate that's based on April 2018 as far as what they have seen added to the tax roll so far. We do see some growth in sales and use tax revenues. I would point out that revenue source is dependent on the economy and really can take a flat line or a reversal if the economy starts to slow down or there are challenges in the general overall economy. Right now, though, it's continuing to tick up. The 4th bullet there really shows the reintroduction or reestablishment of the solid waste fee. Solid waste fee has been $80 in the past on an annual basis. That would equate to $429,000. The current cost, and you'll see a later slide that shows this in great detail, is over $1.2 million to provide the service, and that includes the new enhanced recycling where you're encouraged to throw many things in the recycling container and have it picked up every other week, and your capacity to recycle is increased greatly. That $80 is about 1/3 of the total cost that's allotted per house on an annual basis, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that is a significant item that we want to highlight. But then the last one really is what Lisa touched on earlier, and we're going to come back to this a couple different times, is we are proposing no appropriated fund balance in this budget. And there's a number of reasons to not do that. We're going to show you some charts and some different reasons why that just doesn't continue to work. But that is significant, because if you have available several $100,000 each year as has been utilized in past years, it's possible. But we have a adopted fund balance policy, 30 to 40% range, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more as we get into the presentation.
Thank you. So this chart kind of shows the history of the unassigned fund balance, and if you remember our conversation, we talked about this a little bit at the retreat, and we talked about it again when we just adopted in April the new fund balance policy. Unassigned basically means available for appropriation. It's what you can appropriate. It's going to be a little bit easier, hopefully, in the future to tell what you have available, because we've extracted, I think, most, if not all, of the restricted funds. So the history, as you can see, we have spent about $3 million in the last 5 years. And some of the things that was in 2013, we paid almost $1.4 million for a piece of property. 2014, we started working on purchasing the police department. We did get $6.5 million worth of debt, but we paid for about $1 million of it ourselves. 2015, we designated $1.4 million to Kensington Drive, among other things. These are just the main primary reasons. In fiscal year 16, we spent $1,320,000 some for the Y land. Also purchased the Duncan McDonald House and the adjacent property, and we started our 3-year program of $350,000 for a total of $1,050,000 for the Y properties. So all that fund balance did go to capital projects. Some of it obviously covered operating costs as well. So that's why we're saying, you know, the 34% is where we were at the end of last fiscal year. I think we're going to stay somewhere around there. I don't think we'll add to fund balance this year. So that's why it's important that we preserve that for a couple of reasons, not only because it's not sustainable, but also for our CIP, it's very important. It's kind of like your home credit score. When we go out to get a loan or issue any kind of debt, be it a GO bond or a bank financing, they're going to look at how do you handle your savings, what kind of fiscal stewards are we, and if we're depleting our fund balance every year, we're not going to look like we can save so that's important that we turn that trend around as we start our CIP project.
And just to tack on to what Lisa said, is that is a very valid strategy that's been employed over the last few years. It's not something that to say it was not correct. It actually is a very good strategy, but there is also a point where you need to say there is a minimum to what we want to have in that fund, and you've said that. And so we now have a range that runs from 30 to 40%, or we're within that. And so what the policy says is if you get below that, then we've got to come back to you with a corrective plan of action. We're saying we're not going to get below that because we're going to go ahead and be proactive and take an approach to address it before we remove dollars from that fund balance. So again, not a bad thing to purchase property or make capital investments from your fund balance. That's one reason it's there. It's there for the rainy day fund, for catastrophes, for emergencies, but it's also built up in a high growth community to give the board or boards flexibility to address capital needs as they move forward. Those priorities are board priorities, and they're no reflection on anything that's been done. Those are just historically the ways that capital have been paid for, and so this is the time to say to live within the policy, we have to not appropriate fund balance moving forward.
Darn it.
Okay, so go to the slide that's in the PowerPoint because the statistics disappeared.
So this slide just kind of shows you where the general fund revenue sources come from. I don't think it'll be any surprise, but 52% of it is real property on our real estate, 6% is the motor vehicle. So together, those two components, which is that very large piece and then that green piece right next to it, that's our property tax. So 58% of all the general fund funding comes from that source. The second largest piece is the kind of brown piece over there, kind of on the left bottom. That's 17%. That's the sales tax revenue. It has seen some growth, but yet again, like Greg said, it is very subject to economic situation. The other larger part is the kind of green piece right there. That's permits and fees. That revenue covers a portion of the building inspection and permitting departments. Some of the other pieces are just some unrestricted intergovernmental revenues and utility franchise taxes that we get from the state. Again, there are no grants in the general fund. There's no PAL bill anymore. So the The revenues that are in there are just simply the revenues that can be used to operate the town. There is that small green line, or blue line right there. That is the proposed $429,000 worth of sanitation fees.
Moving on to the next slide, this really gets to the major categories that are identified in the general fund expenditures and gives some comparison to the current year budget. And so we'll walk through these and just talk about what's behind some of the numbers. Personnel increases, we have a slide here in just a moment that shows a little bit of detail about that, but we do have 2.5 new positions that are proposed in the new budget, and we have some other salary changes that we'll discuss a little bit in a moment. We have a fairly significant operating decrease in this department, where our department heads went through and looked at ways that we can save money and scale back some of our operating costs. Some of our departments are doing a good job of sharing equipment and identifying areas where they can cooperate and not overlap. There's a number of things that have been looked at and rebid, or question as far as do we need the same number of copiers that we've had. I mean, just those things that you think might not get looked at are getting looked at and have been looked at, and actually changes have been made to get to help fund some of this decrease. But each of the departments had a contribution in trying to help do that. There is an increase there, line number 3, in capital expenditures. This really gets to equipment that's needed and things that are needed from an infrastructure standpoint to continue to deliver services, and we've got a slide in a little bit that'll get to what those are. The 4th line shows the increase in the sanitation contract, which is directly related to 2 things. One is the change in delivery method for recycling that started in February. The second is the number of houses that continues to be added to the contract. So that's about $125,000 of additional new cost in the fiscal year that starts July 1st. There's a small increase in the fire department appropriation. I think we've mentioned previously that the fire department's looking for a piece of equipment that is a compressor that fills air packs so that they don't have to leave the station here in Waxhaw and go to another department. And then there's a small amount of money allocated for departmental or events downtown that are town sponsored. I think there was one on the list at one point that we removed that was non-town sponsored, but this just relates to town sponsored events. The last line there is decrease in transfers out, and I'm going to have Lisa probably talk about that line, because that's another one that can get fairly complicated if you try to make just a straight line comparison from one year to the next. Right.
So in the original budget, that line was also budgeted for $650,000, and I think I mentioned that was $300,000 for Nesbitt and $350,000 for the Y. But as we amended the budget, those transfers out are because we took the TAP grant out, we took the PAL bill out, and we took the restricted funds out. I'm hoping that next year when you all look at this, because the general fund will only have operating in it, it's going to be much easier to see comparison between the years. But the manager's document also, it's 18 pages long. It hopefully explains to you what these differences are, that we could identify the differences between the current year budget and the proposed budget. So hopefully all that narrative will explain any questions you have. But a lot of times I just want to remind everybody, when you're trying to look at it, you're going to just have to remember that it's been amended, and hopefully next year it'll be a lot clearer. And the breakout also is not only for transparency, but it will help us be a little bit more accurate about how much is left in different pots of money.
The next slide actually relates back to that sanitation contract history, and in 2016 we're about $900,000. We're now looking at $1.25 million. 2 things have occurred there. Again, the contract itself has changed with the provision of recycling service here in February, and then the increase in houses that continues to come into town. Just as a marker across the state, staff has looked at communities that are similar in size to Waxhaw, and roughly 80% of the communities in our size utilize the solid waste fee. So in returning to that as a form of revenue, we certainly would not be alone. In fact, the vast majority do utilize that particular fee, and most of them, or a lot of them, are using the fee to cover all the costs. We are not proposing that. We are proposing that we're at about $80 or at $80 a year, which is about a third of the total cost. So it's still well below what kind of the average town in our size is out there charging. Lisa pointed out earlier to me and just internally that there's a number of communities that use the solid waste department function as an enterprise fund, and they're just using that as a simple business, cost in, cost out. There's no fancy accounting for it, but they take the annual cost per house, divide it by, or multiply it times 12 on a monthly basis, and then add that to the tax bill. So it's just a pass-through fee. They set it up as an enterprise fund. We are not proposing that we do that because the $80 doesn't cover the cost. It simply is defraying some of that that's currently coming from the general fund. It does cost $217 per house, so that $80 again is not going to cover even half the cost. The last line there is really kind of an important line. Is this helps toward that fund balance goal to not appropriate fund balance into the operating budget.
Apologize for the slides. For some reason, the fonts don't pick up when you move a presentation around. But so, as you can see, this is just kind of trying to show you where the major expense categories are. And in our general fund, like most towns, we usually look at them in the categories of personnel, operating, and capital. And we monitor the fluctuations between years in those categories, not necessarily by line item. Personnel is 51% of our general fund budget, which is the same for all local governments. It takes a lot of people to run a town. So that's not unusual for 51%. That's $5.8 million. And the police department is the largest of that. The police department is $2.2 million worth of our $11 million budget. That also includes our taxes, retirement, medical insurance. The operating is 45% of our general fund budget, and that's things like our dues, debt payment for the police department, electricity, fuel for our cars, and that sort of thing. Whatever it takes to do day to day. There's no projects. There's no. It's just operating costs of each department. And the capital is 4%, and that's that equipment, cars, and that kind of thing that is used just for operating the department. There's no capital projects in that amount.
So highlighting kind of the personnel side of the house, 2.5 proposed new positions, a police officer, a planner, and then a part-time program coordinator in the Parks and Recreation Department. Those salaries and benefits and all added together, the $144,000 is up at the top. We have an employee merit program, and our employees all get evaluated on an annual basis, and they're eligible for merit adjustment. The range is 0 to 3%. We use a 2.5% average because we truly use merit as a merit program, and there are employees that get 0. There are employees that get toward the middle of the range, and there are employees that get evaluated and merit on the high end of the range. We use an average there and don't budget a high end of the number as the budgeted number. We've had stability in our medical insurance program, but we do have changes from time to time in the number of employees that cover family members, and so we do have a change there this year. The health insurance coverage overall has been very stable. It's bid out and reviewed, and that the costs are examined each year to make sure that we're competitive. But we do have some changes from year to year. Sometimes when family members get added to the policy, you'll see a little bit more of a bump, but then that won't show up the next year because they're then on the system. So if we have a new employee and they have some portion of their family that's now on the coverage, and that can relate to increased costs for the first year. The state retirement system looks at the contribution rate each year, and they send out adjustments as needed to that contribution rate. So there's a small retirement contribution increase that's as a result of them adjusting the rate this year, and that's really to make sure that the retirement system stays healthy in the long run. Nationally, you're hearing some discussions about other pension systems that aren't healthy. North Carolina's system is healthy, and it's because they've continued to very closely monitor the contribution rate and the investment results so that they're doing what they need to do.
Unfortunately, this slide also is acting up, but you can see on your handout that, again, if you look at our expenditures by function, which is the way our town has adopted its budget, is by function, and that's how most municipalities adopt their budget. But the police department, again, is 29% of our general fund budget. The community development services, which is engineering, building inspections, planning, Main Street downtown code enforcement, that's 19%. Then the general government is that green section right there. That's administration, finance, HR, clerk's department, IT. And public services and recreation are very small at 8%. Our sanitation contract, however, is 11% of our budget. The transfers to CIP is 6%, so that's at $650,000. So that's where the money goes.
Operationally, there's some highlights in the recommended budget. The first of which is there is a decrease in the operating budget, $131,000. We mentioned it briefly. That's a reduction in what we spent from this year that we're in. The board has discussed and approved a funding strategy for the external agencies, and that resulted in a $4,400 decrease in outside agency funding. We have finished the third and final year of the Buxton contract, and so the Main Street area downtown has a reduction because of the elimination of that contract and the annual costs associated with it. The next bullet again repeats the sanitation cost contracts. The fifth line there is we do have some costs associated with the Ardmore apartments that are one-time in nature, meaning that this is not an ongoing inspection. This will be as part of the construction process, so that they are actually paid for as part of the inspection fees, but they have to be budgeted so that we actually are recognizing those on both sides in the inspection fee revenue and then also as a cost, but we're showing it just because it's something different. It's a one-time cost in this case. Internet costs have been accounted for in our technology department. First is being spread out because we're tracking costs in technology separate from the departments. We have reallocation of liability insurance among the departments. I'm going to spend just a moment explaining what that means. In simple terms, you have things like auto insurance that are very easy to assign a department because the department has use of a vehicle. You have property, and so buildings like this building are assigned to various departments. But then the general liability and professional liability and other things are not really assigned to a department, so there's got to be a way to allocate those costs per department. And so that involves really some judgment as to the appropriate way to do that, and then some consistency over time so that we, as the bill changes over time and you get credit, you get experience ratios, and it becomes fairly complicated, but there's a reallocation that's taken place and there'll be some consistency moving forward among our departments. The cemetery now is a new restricted fund. And Powellville, I think we've talked about also previously, is now in a new restricted fund.
So this is just trying to show you the difference between the capital, operating capital for the departments between the 2 fiscal years. The police department this year, they actually asked for 4 patrol vehicles and an animal control. We had to cut the budget. They gave up, again, 2 vehicles, which last year they got 2 vehicles fully equipped. They actually have a need for quite a few more. They have many of their vehicles are rated poor in their fleet. So we're trying our best to get them up to speed and get their vehicles replaced. So this budget has 2 patrol vehicles fully equipped, and you also have to understand that whenever you're equipping a police vehicle, the equipment costs almost as much as the car. It also has 1 truck for the animal control officer, which has some extensive equipment on that as well. The $150,000 for the finance department is for software. There's a lot of there's modules that software does not have that we need for things such as our fixed asset accounting. The town has never done their own fixed asset accounting. The prior auditor did that, which is not good. So we need to be able to do that ourselves in-house. It also has several other issues. For example, the permitting software that's up in the front office, they collect money all day long. Those 2 systems don't talk to each other. So every day, the finance department has to re-input that revenue into the finance software. There's a number of different reasons I can explain to you why we need that. We are going to go out for bid. We've listened to several different webinars, and we're going to get several different quotes. I got that number from getting 3 quotes from different softwares. So hopefully it'll be somewhere around there, hopefully a little bit less. Technology department, that is for 2 things. One is for $19,000 for the large main server that houses almost all of the data for most of the departments. It is past its warranty time period and needs to be replaced. It's very important. And it's also for fiber extension to be able to make our internet more reliable for our departments and our downtown. Public Services has asked for 2 vehicles. They also are in pretty dire need for vehicles. I think the vehicle that Todd's driving around has over 100,000 miles on it. And my favorite thing is that they have a 1992 truck that they're still driving, which is amazing, a 26-year-old vehicle. So they in the last year, the $119,000, they did replace 1 vehicle, but they also got a leaf vac and a gator. Parks and Recreation, that department just got created a few years ago using old equipment that was way past its useful life that got passed down to them. The maintenance guys actually bring their own small equipment and tools to work with them because they don't have it. So we're trying to get them some small equipment in there and also a truck. They don't currently have a truck that can pull their events trailer. And Events is also asking for barricades and other safety equipment. Right now, whenever they have an event, if you remember, they cordon off everything with tape, which it doesn't work really well. People drive right through it. So that's what they're doing. The administration doesn't have any capital. The downtown has not asked for any capital. That $106,000 was the wayfinding project that is almost wrapping up with the final signs coming up shortly.
So moving to the capital improvement plan, this really is the big plan that lays the groundwork for a future bond referendum or other debt or financing. So it also included some pay-as-you-go options, if you recall. I think back page 27, 28 really gave the scenarios there on how that could play out in the next 4 to 5 years. those projects, again, are multi-year in planning, design, execution, and so a lot of times we don't own the property or we don't own the right-of-way. We certainly have to coordinate utilities. We have to coordinate with other parties, whether it includes purchasing right-of-way. But those are all generally 5 to 6 years minimum in total planning and coordination and execution. Those are reflected in the CIP, and those are the things that over time will come back and provide options for financing. So as we've discussed a couple times, we have the possibility of a bond referendum in November of 2019 is one option, and that would be sized based on a lot of future discussion, utilizing the documentation that we've gathered so far for options on the CIP. In a short-term reflection of the CIP, there are 2 projects in it that we're looking to possibly implement in the next fiscal year based on our schedule that could be a shorter term financing or bank financing. And those, as you may recall, are the Waxhaw fields, so we've called them Waxhaw YMCA fields. That project kind of teed up for the fall. And the other project is the public services facility. We're still working on location for that. And so if and when there's a final option to be presented to the board on a location for it, then that project could really start to pick up steam fairly quickly. But those are the 2 that are in the fiscal year. What I'll point out is that you may not see somewhat of what you'd think would be an operating impact or a fiscal impact in this year, and simply because those 2 projects, if they are financed in the next 12 months for the fiscal year calendar, the impact won't be until the following 12 months. So while they're in the CIP, while they're projects we're working on, you're not going to necessarily see them reflected in operating cost in the next fiscal year. The small transportation program, again, is a way to address congestion and infrastructure needs from a transportation standpoint. These, again, are the smaller scope transportation improvements, intersections, turn lanes, traffic signals, tactical in nature. These can be sidewalk specific. They're really designed to be 12, 18 months time frame. The option proposed for the way to fund the program is very straightforward. It is the vehicle fee, and it's, as the last bullet says, one of the few options authorized under existing state law. It also is very closely tied to the need, so it's set up so out of the $25, $20 is already restricted through the statute that it levies it, or authorizes it rather, to go toward transportation. The other 5 is optional as to what the locality does with it, and it says basically you can use it for any authorized purchase under general statutes. Our proposal is that it's very simply restricted and put all toward transportation, because number 1, it's levied on a vehicle, number 2, that's where the needs are, and then the third way is that's the most transparent way that you can have a fee, is set it up in a reserve fund, not make any secrets about what it's going to be applied to, and move forward with a plan. There are other options out there for revenue, but they involve things that we've talked about before, such as referendums. So there's only a few that we're really authorized that we're not utilizing currently. There's a lot of other options that other states have authorized. We don't have access to them, so they would require going to the General Assembly, and then the nexus to the need is not necessarily clear. So impact fees are levied by other states, or allowed to be levied by other states. But then the question is, how do you split up the impact fee? Do you put it all toward roads? Do you put it toward the police department, the fire department? So that's an open question. But at the end of the day, we don't have access to that particular revenue source. The other sources that we have, even the general obligation process and going to the voters in a bond referendum, you still have to come back and figure out how to service the debt. So the answer to how do you service the debt might very well lead us right back to the same option of vehicle fee or some other type of change to the property tax rate. So you come back at the end of the day to how do you pay for it, and this is an option that is currently authorized.
Oh, and I'll add one other thing about that debt. Whenever any local government in North Carolina has to get debt, we have to go to the local government commission. So they're going to ask us whenever when we want to have any kind of debt, be it bank financing or more especially anything that's going to raise our tax rate. The local government commission is going to ask us, have we considered any other revenue sources before we raise taxes? And this is one of the sources that they'll ask us if we considered. So that'll be down the road. If we don't adopt this, they'll ask us if we considered it.
Again, the small transportation program is predicated on a discussion that the board would have to determine what projects need to be on a list that staff would work on. We would suggest to you that list not really be ranked by the board, but that you give the staff the flexibility to come back to the board and recommend what projects are feasible to be brought forward in a timely manner, and then also which projects really tee up from a timing standpoint to what's happening on the ground. And so an example would be we're working on the Waxhaw-Marvin corridor study. There will be results out of that study that will inform what could or should happen up and down that corridor. That might make one of those projects more ripe than something on another part of town. However, we may find out that there's a proposal for development that's coming that would also require improvements on that same corridor. And so the recommendation to the board might be, even though there's a project on that list, let's wait and tee up the improvement with the development as it occurs and make one improvement, have one contractor out there making improvements, but also being disruptive to the corridor, and really kind of tee it up from a timing standpoint. So that's the flexibility that we would request and suggest by just having a list that's a list of priorities that are 10 or 12 or 8. They're more important than items that are not on the list, but there's some flexibility in how they're approached. That really kind of brings us toward the conclusion of what we have as a PowerPoint. This lays out some of the next steps that we do know we have dates for. We're asking the board to follow a process that was used last year that was pretty successful, I thought. It was something that we suggested that the board email questions into staff. If you'll send those to the finance director, we will consolidate those. We'll take the names and whoever submitted them off and just make it into one master document and try to answer those questions prior to the next work session. And the third bullet there says we have a budget work session scheduled for May 15th. So if you can get us questions by the end of the day on Thursday, frankly by midnight on Thursday, because we're not going to do anything after 5, but if we can get something Thursday night as far as questions, and that'll give us a couple days to try to get the answers, check the answers, and then get those back out to the board prior to the work session on Tuesday the 15th. The public hearing is scheduled for May 22nd. That's an opportunity for the public to come and comment on the proposed budget. And then the scheduled adoption for agenda item is for June the 12th. And so that's the schedule we've been on since, I guess, January. And we're proposed to move forward under that time frame. If you would just send those questions to Lisa, and then she'll consolidate those and then start the process of things that we potentially don't know in-house. The department heads would certainly be able to weigh in and provide that information if we don't have it. Just as a final item, the budget message, the letter, transmission letter is the document that you see here. It is 50 pages. It has detail, as Lisa said, about some of the things that are different this year. So there are things that are highlighted there that we thought were important to note. That helps answer a lot of questions. So if you have an opportunity to read through that first, that's probably the best first step to kind of start with that. And it helps relate back to some of the things that we've shared in the PowerPoint. So with that, I'll.
Can I have a question? Ask a question. Are we going to be getting more information than this? I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm going, where's the beef? Where's the department budgets? Where's the line items? I see, you know, communications wants 71,700 for what? Where does that go? I need more information
Well,
if I'm going to vote on these things.
Okay, so as I said earlier, we adopt our budget by function, so the ordinance is by function, so each function is police department, community development. So within that function, once the budget is adopted, those departments are able to move money from one line to the other.
But where do these numbers come from?
Well,
Like communications says $71,744.
right.
For what?
So the line items is this. If you want the line items,
I would
can give
love
you
that. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Last year, we received the line item.
Right, so,
package with
so,
the-
so last year it was hand-typed in there, so that document was produced for that. So the other thing you have to understand is that, so if you adopt a line item in one department for, say, office supplies, and that department, for some reason, uses more copy machine color copies, and they run out of money in the copy machine, they'll move a little bit of money to cover it.
I understand that.
So they have that bucket to be able to move. But I can share with you the line
Yes,
item
please.
information if that helps.
Yes, please. Could you email that to us?
I don't have it by email, I have it this way. It doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't.
And Melody, can we get copies of that?
I have a couple of them. These are kind of the work papers we were working on, so I think I have 3 or 4 of them, and the
I would love a
staff,
copy.
some of the staff has their copies
Okay.
as well. So I'll
Around.
pass
Thank you.
them around. I think I have a couple more.
Send them there for now.
Okay.
So just to
Very
be,
much.
just to be clear, you want us to go through this, understand it, get questions to you by end of day Thursday. Any and all questions, fair game. And you'll come back, perhaps in a written document, but by close of business Monday, May 14th, hopefully you'll come back with, here's the questions, here's the answers, and we'll take that and sit down and discuss it at the work session on the 15th. That's kind of the game plan that we're on. So we have a hard to do over the next 48 hours to get any and all questions that we may have to you. Okay. Any other clarification questions needed?
Pass another one. There's
I have
Okay.
one.
Yeah, I'm coming.
more.
Any other clarification questions?
So are there, since we've put into the budget the vehicle fees, so we're saying if we adopt this budget, we are charging, I'm sorry, not the vehicle fee, the sanitation fee. So that's,
They're both in there.
and so we adopt the budget, and that means that we are charging these fees. Is it right? Is there going to be any discussion on that, or?
What we have is a proposed budget. Now it's up to us over the next month to discuss it as a board. So,
Okay.
so that, yeah, so plenty of time to discuss and ask questions on it.
I noticed you have, to adopt the budget June 12th, the first meeting. Normally, we do it on the last meeting, which gives us a little more time. Past 2 years, we've done it the last meeting of June.
Last year was a unique one because we had 3 managers working the budget. I can't remember the one before that, but was it the same? Last meeting, so, I mean, that's something, it's currently on the schedule. If we want to move it, we can.
I think, just for me, I need to go through all of this. I need more than 2 days till Thursday.
Yeah, I could use a weekend to get through this.
How about Monday?
I guess the question is.
The question is, can the board have until Monday morning to get you the input.
Questions?
Sure.
Thank
I
you
mean,
very
I think the caveat is, are we still planning on doing the 15th evening? So there may be some question that we're not able to address before that evening, but yeah, absolutely.
That's, Monday is 14th,
Yeah.
May
so-
14th.
I would suggest we hold the meeting, whatever
Mm-hmm.
can
Get
be
through what we can
discussed,
get through.
we can discuss. Whatever you can't get through, we can set up an additional action plan, but at least we can have some discussion on it.
Sure.
I'd like to see us get as many questions to you, obviously, before the public hearing. So, and we can take, make a determination after the public hearing as to, do we push the adoption out to the second meeting in June? You know, we'll know at least by the second meeting in May what's left. What are we happy with, what are we struggling with, and all that, so. Just keep us whole legally with any notices that we may have to make to change any notices to the public about the budget. We need to stay clean on that one.
There is going to be a copy of this, I think, on the website tonight, right after this meeting. And there are copies available in the clerk's office and in the front office.
Yes.
Right.
So, yeah, just to be clear, in the consent agenda, we will accept the proposed budget from the manager, which then this will be posted out on the website, so everybody will be able to look at it, which is good. Okay. With that, we got 25 minutes before our next board meeting, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.